Welcome back to Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams, the podcast where we explore the wisdom, resilience, and the dreams of those who came before us and how their legacy shapes our present and future. I'm Cara, and each week we'll dive into stories, traditions, and conversations that reconnect us with our roots, our ancestors, and help us plant seeds for a brighter tomorrow. This podcast is about more than storytelling. It's about reclaiming our narratives, reflecting on our journey, and rooting ourselves in the dreams that carried our people forward. So grab your tea, your journal, or just a moment of quiet as we take this journey together. Let's begin. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Rachael DuBose. She is a licensed professional clinical counselor supervisor at Be the Light in Ohio. And she is here to talk to us about suicide crisis and the journey towards healing. Thank you for being here. To start, what does Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams mean to you?
Thank you so much, Cara, for inviting me and giving me the ability to be in community with you today. I think for me, when it comes to being rooted in our ancestors, oh wow, like that's such a heavy question. I think because I was raised by my paternal grandparents, I think I had a different type of lens when it came to ancestral connection, because I kind of already had that sort of older, like my grandmother was really, really big on like know your people. And so we always had photo albums. We always went to family reunions. She always made sure for many reasons, to know like where we came from and also where we could go. So I think for me, being rooted in my ancestors' dreams feels like continuing their legacy, and also doing the things that they may not have been able to do. So things like rest and say no and, show up authentically and show up as my full self, being able to honor them in that way. I know I see a lot of folks say like, oh, we not our ancestors, we XYZ ABC, and that feels always very disrespectful to me because there are so many things that we don't have to experience because of the sacrifices that they made. So I think for me, it feels like honoring them by achieving things, but also by saying no, having boundaries, and resting, for sure.
Thank you. Thank
Absolutely.
you. From a clinical and human perspective, what are some of the most misunderstood aspects of suicide and mental health crisis?
So there's a lot of myths about suicide that I've heard of. And so I also, I'm a counselor. I also facilitate trainings. And when I talk about suicide prevention, we go through some of the myths and sort of like misconceptions about what it means for a person to be experiencing suicidal thoughts, or have a plan. And so I think the main one is if I ask the person about it, then that will be putting that idea in their head. And that's not how that works. I think that I know that for a lot of folks, someone being able to say, hey, I'm noticing this, or I'm observing that you're different, or you're less bubbly, or you're more withdrawn, to be able to call it out can be a deterrent. So I think that's one of the main ones. Like, I don't want to ask the person because that might be, bringing something up that they haven't been thinking about. And if you're at the point where you're worried about it, they've already been thinking about it. So that's probably the number one myth. And then also that, that folks who are experiencing suicidal thoughts or in mental health crisis look a certain way, act a certain way, talk a certain way, or if they're happy at any point in time, there's no way this person could be suicidal. And that is also untrue. And so I think, statistically, it's like when someone is experiencing improvement in their symptoms, for some people, that is the most likely for them to die by suicide, because folks aren't checking, because folks feel like, oh, they're getting better, so we don't have to lay eyes on them. We don't have to keep following up or checking in. And then folks take that step. So definitely not, bringing it up does not put the idea in their head. And just because a person appears happy doesn't mean they aren't at risk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, to piggyback on what you said about, kind of speaking it into existence, I think also as clinicians, we have to be really intentful about using words, because I know a lot of times we skirt around the issue and we say, are you going to hurt yourself? Well, there's a difference between self-harm and suicide and suicidal thoughts. So I'm always very intentional on using the word, do you plan on killing yourself? And I think, I don't know if it's the way we're taught or if it's like a self-conscious thing, or we think we're going to scare them into doing it. But as you said, they've had those thoughts. So we might as well use their language, meet people where they are and get to the root of it to determine exactly how, serious this is so we can act.
Absolutely.
What cultural factors, especially within communities of color, even if we look at LGBTQ, even if we look at nationality, how does that shape how people talk about or avoid conversations around suicide and mental health?
I mean, I know, and I've experienced a way in which people, hopefully can you still hear me, Miss Carr?
Yes.
Okay, because I was like, because the number stopped. I'm like, uh-oh. So anyway, I would say that one of the things that I hear a lot, especially among Black American folks, is that we don't do that, right? That there is this sort of inherent side eye when it comes to people experiencing suicidal thoughts or someone dies by suicide, and it's like, oh, it couldn't be that because they were so happy, or that's some white people stuff, or whatever that sounds like culturally, right? And so I know that there is a misconception that it only impacts certain demographics when the numbers say very different.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree. I can remember as a young child, I don't think we even talked about it or even that I knew what suicide was, but my paternal uncle had committed suicide, and I just knew that he was there one day and not there the next. And I don't think it was till I was in my teens, maybe even my adulthood, that I realized, the heaviness of that we don't talk about that anymore or how it affected us. But it went to show me that people can put on a happy face, and then the next minute he didn't have those moments of giving away stuff, saying his goodbyes, those kind of myths or those things that people tell us. This is what happens when people are prepared to die or they want to commit suicide. That was not happening I don't hear a lot of that happening within the Black community. It's just like one day you're there, the next day you're not. But there's a lot of pain and a lot of trauma in between that point that we miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just shifting like how we talk about suicide. I know that, in recent years, folks have really been trying to shift from saying, things like committed suicide or they successfully completed suicide to a more person-centered approach of the person died by suicide, the person passed away from suicide, just as we would talk about, the person died from cancer or the person died from diabetes complications, that recognizing it as a mental health condition versus a crime, essentially, because it was a crime for many years. Like historically, it was illegal. So I think even just shifting that narrative so that we are putting the sort of process and the sort of like we're thinking about it in the terms of this is a person who felt like this was their only way out, and versus, kind of insinuating that there's some wrongdoing. But I think there's culture of not only cultural, but like spiritual implications too, right? Like people talk about, that it's a sin depending on your spiritual beliefs. And so then there's this, again, which furthers the stigma of help, right? So if I'm a person who's experiencing suicidal thoughts and my family is a family that is, very much rooted in, certain type of ideologies surrounding suicide, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to tell folks that I'm struggling. I'm not going to want to say, I don't know about what's happening tomorrow, because there may be this response of just pray. That's the devil, right? Like detaching it from, it's me. I'm struggling. What do I do? Right. So that can be really, really hard for folks too.
Yeah. Yeah. What role does shame, stigma, and silence play in preventing people from seeking help before like a mental health crisis occurs or before the act of thinking about taking their life, or,
I mean, I think
before they get into really, just a really bad place.
absolutely that darkness, right? I know I've seen, stigma plays the biggest part. Stigma, it kind of all goes together. So stigma, shame, um, not being able to say that I'm not doing well, the sort of implications of I have to be strong. And for a lot of folks, strong equals emotionless. And so that two things can't coexist, that I can't be strong and also be emotionally tapped in, or I can't be strong and be able to say, I need help. Like those things can coexist, but there's definitely a stigma and indicating that they can't. And so that definitely, like shame, stigma, those are at the top of the list. Where folks, especially again, those cultural implications, spiritual implications, it keeps people from even saying it out loud, from even speaking it. And to your point before, being direct about when you're worried about somebody, ask the question, right? We want to say, are you thinking about dying by suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Not, oh, are you trying to be out of here? Like all of those, because that's more about our discomfort versus we're trying to save this person's life.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. It is our discomfort as people. What I find is that's a heavy topic for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people don't feel that they are equipped or comfortable in dealing with those conversations about that stuff, or even the pain or event or whatever that's causing it. So they kind of out of sight, out of mind. So if I skirt around the issue, maybe they'll find someone else that can help.
Yes, exactly.
But that leaves the person who is contemplating to feel like what they normally feel like is helpless, hopeless. Nobody is hearing me. Nobody can see my pain. This is going to keep going on. Nobody cares.
Absolutely. Or also, like, I don't want to burden anybody. Like, we got enough going on. I don't want to be yet another layer of, now you feel like you have to be taken care of. Or are you also, sometimes folks just don't want to be seen as the person that's struggling with that. Like, there's like a label. It's like, oh, so-and-so, they're just, no, they always think like that, or they always feel like that, as a way to sort of minimize and diminish the impact and the severity and the heaviness of what's really going on. Absolutely.
Do you feel like in your experience as a professional that children and adults kind of experience this differently in terms of being seen and heard? Do you feel like it's a little bit harder as an adult to be seen and heard, as like with children or adolescents? People are like they're acting out. It's just more apparent than it is with adults, who tend to I think as adults, we tend to be a little bit more isolated.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the approach is different. I think I think it's kind of two sides of a similar coin. So like with children, I've heard parents, other adults, caregivers say, well, they're just trying to get attention. And my response to that as a professional is, of course they are. They're children. So what do we do with that? But saying that in a way to minimize or sidestep what's really happening. But I think for adults, it can be, they're just saying that for attention, and we all struggling. So what else? Right? So there's still this sort of both sides of the same coin, as far as the end result is minimizing and sidestepping the seriousness of what's going on, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I also want to know, like, professionally, what can other therapists or even managers, teachers, whatever, what can they do when they see someone struggling, or how can they kind of evoke these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially when it comes to like schools and children, I think if we don't talk about it, then children feel like they can't talk about it. And so I think there is a way for educators and other those sorts of organizations or sort of environments to have the conversation, like ongoing, and checking in with folks and also providing resources. So it's not just we're talking about it and it stops there. Like we talk about it and then what? Right? We ask the question, how are you holding up? Are you thinking, like, if we see sort of signs and children are being more withdrawn, or even especially in the workplace, you notice things are changing, the person is not as engaged, or they're more irritable, or they're, missing meetings or struggling to keep up with assignments, like being able to lean in versus lean back and say, hey, I'm noticing XYZ ABC. And then that puts it on organizations to have the resources to support a person who may be struggling like that. So that might be a different conversation, or the same, really, because I think there's also a piece that's missing there. Like, if my manager was to ask me, how are you doing? How are you holding up? And I've noticed some things, and then we just leave it there. Well, okay, I'm sorry to hear that, but that report's still due on Monday. Oh, okay. Well, that wasn't helpful either, right? So not only talking about it, but also providing tangible resources that children and adults can tap into when and if they are feeling that way. So I think sometimes, especially in like corporate world, like, it looks good, it sounds good, we're a wellness, we care about we're a family, all those sorts of things, but it stops there. It stops with the talking, and we have to do more than talk.
Yeah. Yeah. What resources or safety planning tools can be life-saving for people experiencing suicidal thoughts? So I hear you say a lot about, just having that talk with them and being intentional and caring. But what out there in the community can individuals access to help people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts?
Absolutely. The number one resource that I recommend is 988. It is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call it, you can text it. There are licensed crisis counselors there to help triage. So even if you're a professional and you have a client and you're like, I'm not sure if this is a situation where this person should go to the hospital, you can still call 988 even if you're not actively in crisis, and they can help sort of talk you through that as a professional. Even if your client is in a different city, they can send the appropriate authorities. And that's a whole nother thing, because I know that, especially, so I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I know down here, we have mobile crisis. The only thing with mobile crisis is that with mobile crisis, there's a licensed professional that comes, but the police also come, right? So that's a whole nother implication, right? And so if I'm a client and I'm struggling with that, and my therapist or my professional person says, okay, I'm really worried about you, let's call, mobile crisis. They're going to come and see what's happening. And I hope that they would tell me that the police are going to come. That, depending on my, historical trauma when it comes to policing in the United States, that could really like send me somewhere else, right? And so I think that mobile crisis, a lot of cities have some sort of like mobile crisis team. 988, like I said, is the number one resource that I feel like is really, really helpful, because again, even if you're not sure what to do, they can help sort of triage that, and they can send help wherever. And we can also say to them, we need someone, if you're going to send EMS or the police, send someone who is well versed in dealing with folks who are experiencing a mental health challenge. That's not always available. So there's limits there, sort of like systemically, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And some counties do have like a mental health trained crisis support team that includes the police. So there's just things that we also have to just be mindful of too. But 988 is probably the number one resource I would recommend, for sure.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I was not aware. I've heard of crisis teams, the mobile crisis, but I did not know that police were sent in addition. I thought it was a clinical staff that went out to the house to assess the individual or the situation.
Yes. And so again, I'm not sure how other cities are doing it, but I know Cincinnati, the licensed person comes, but the police come too, for safety reasons. But from things that I've heard from folks who have had to call, or professionals who've had to call, it can be a little jarring for folks to be like, I'm already struggling, I'm already going through, and now the police are here. And they may have to handcuff you and all types of other stuff to, which they would say, for safety reasons, and make sure you don't have anything in your pockets, all that sort of stuff. Now they'll take you to the hospital. You're not going to jail, but it's still, that can be traumatizing too, right? We don't want to add other layers to it if we can help it. So 988 is a great resource. They can, dispatch emergency services and do their best to ensure that the folks that come out are well versed in mental health challenges specifically.
Yes. So that brings up another question. What can professionals such as law enforcement and other agencies, even community agencies, schools, whatever, what can they do to train themselves on recognizing individuals who are in crisis? Because I have seen, as I'm sure many people have, where there have been people who have been on the spectrum or who have been under the influence. Police did not recognize it or whoever. And they thought that this was a person who was, trying to commit a crime or who was violent. And that ended up being a very traumatic or sometimes fatal event, which lends more to people of color in different communities not really trusting calling law enforcement or these other individuals to seek help when their loved ones are experiencing crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and not just because I'm certified to facilitate it, but mental health first aid is a really amazing prevention modality. It's an all-day training, and folks can, you get a certification at the end. It's good for 3 years. And mental health first aid for adults, we have it for youth as well. And also they just started a new one for teens. So teens can be certified and be able to provide mental health first aid to their peers. But specifically, mental health first aid is really good at also tailoring it to certain populations. So we have sort of the general adult mental health first aid, and then we also have mental health first aid for corrections, for public safety, for higher education, for older adults. And so they are able to, for veterans, like they are able to tailor it to. And so I think, like you said, so community spaces and law enforcement and other entities, in those same categories, I think being able to be intentional about training folks and consistently training them and not just a one and done, right? Not just checking a box. Oh, we did this training and that's it, right? So also just making sure that folks learn the information, consistently use it, consistently tap into it, and not just we're marking this on this form so we can get whatever, right? Because I've seen that happen too. And so I think that just being intentional about training folks. So there's mental health first aid, there's question, persuade, refer, which is a suicide prevention modality, and that can be tailored to other populations as well. I think just being intentional about training the people who are on the front lines so that they have the information, and then also being consistent with consequences for folks who don't adhere to that. That might be a whole separate thing. But, if I'm a person who, because I've heard folks say, well, we don't have time for that, right? We're here. This is life or death. We don't have time to triage and sort of process and explore. But we're gonna have to make time, or there'll continue to be these situations. And so even just systemically vetting professionals in a different way, so that we're not even at the space where folks are in that position and have those types of thoughts or don't want to engage with folks who may be experiencing a mental health challenge. So training, I feel like it's really, really big, huge, actually. And again, not just a checkbox. It being consistent training, consistent refreshers, consistently tapping in with folks and just investing in that knowledge for sure.
Yes, I think having worked on crisis lines and worked in inpatient, I think it's very important for clinicians to really know how to assess and kind of manage crisis and suicidal ideation, behaviors, that kind of thing, because it can be traumatic if you don't know how to assess correctly and you just hear one word, you go on that word, and then this individual is now all of a sudden off to inpatient. And, they're getting shots, they're getting medicated, they're not really getting the help they need because now you just usually it's not in their face where they call. It's usually you call behind them and don't tell them. So now they've had this very traumatic experience with their own therapist. So now they can't really trust.
Absolutely.
So when you assess them, they're looking at you like, why do you all know this? What's going to happen?
Yeah. And how do we explain that in a way that isn't sterile, clinical? How do we make it approachable and relatable while also not dismissing the seriousness of it, right?
Absolutely. I always tell my clients that I'm always going to be honest with you and upfront. We're going to try to work through this together, but I need you to be honest. Honesty needs to go both ways. So I want to know what you're going through. Do you feel like either self-harming, or do you feel like killing yourself? Discuss the difference between I want to die, which
Yes.
sometimes I can kind of relate it to. Sometimes I just want to pull the covers over my head like a really bad migraine and just don't want to wake up. But I don't
Yes.
want to do anything intentional to die.
Yes.
But I don't mind if like a storm hit me or something. And
Right.
they used to kind of chuckle about that. And they're like, yeah, it's that one. But I don't feel
Mhm.
like doing anything dangerous or messy. So like trying to make it normalize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, providing that education too. So that starts with us as professionals to know the difference between a passive death wish, whereas I'm just tired, right? So even when I ask folks, I'm like, do you have you ever had thoughts about wanting to hurt yourself on purpose? So I usually ask it like that. I also ask folks, when they say yes, I'm like, are we talking about, and not trying to like feed information, but just trying to get sort of a litmus of where they are. Are we thinking about, some folks say, so I might come in like, some people feel like, I'm just tired. Like you say, I just want to put a cover over my head and just not have to deal with any of this. Or are we saying when you leave here, you get up in front of a bus and that's it, right? So then I need to know that, because my number one goal here is to keep you safe no matter what. Right? I'm here to keep you safe. I care about you. I want you to be okay, whatever okay looks like for you. And in order for me to do that, I need to know. Yeah, honesty for sure. I'm with you there, Ms. Carr. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just, and we're talking about all this. So part of this is a journey towards healing. So what does that look like for these survivors of individuals who have completed, died by suicide? What does that healing journey look like? Because I know there's a lot of guilt, a lot of confusion, a lot of sadness, a lot of feelings caught up in there.
Absolutely. I think healing for survivors. So if you had a loved one who may have died by suicide, I think, and from what I've seen, it can really be complicated, because it's a different sort of approach for it. So like, let's say a person had cancer and they passed away. It's like, oh my gosh, like, oh, the approach is different. The grieving is different. The support is different. But if someone dies by suicide, it's just seen as this moral failure, versus this person was really struggling and they felt like that was the only way that they could have peace. Right? Like, that's so different. I remember when Robin Williams died, and, folks were, people get into debates and they get in the comments and all that kind of stuff, and it's selfish and all this sort of stuff. But I just always thinking it has to be really, really dark for someone to feel like that is the only way they will have peace. That just like, I just feel like we need to tap more into experiencing and acknowledging the heaviness of that. Right. And it's not always about us, everyone else. Right. So sometimes I think for the healing part for survivors or for family members or loved ones, it's not necessarily about you. Right. It's normal to feel like, how dare they? Right. Because grief has that sort of component. Like, oh my God, I can't believe they left me. I can't believe they did this. Why didn't they just ask? Why didn't they just call? Why didn't they just, share, or whatever that looks like? But unfortunately, we won't know. So how do we make sure that, we're, of course, taking care of ourselves, especially as we're grieving, but also how do we ensure that other folks know that we're there for them no matter what? That even if you don't have the words for it, I'm here. Even if you're not sure what I'm going to say, I'm here. And what can we do? What's next after that? And so I think definitely, of course I'm a therapist, so I'm going to recommend therapy for everybody. I have my own therapist too. She's amazing. So I think that therapy is helpful when it comes to healing for survivors, and even folks who have attempted suicide in the past and maybe are still struggling with, sometimes that's someone's baseline. Like, I've worked with folks whose baseline is, I'm always thinking that that's my out. Right?
Yeah.
And how do we help folks navigate what that even looks like? Right. And then how do we sometimes kind of take, have our hands up with it? Like because sometimes we want to control. And so sometimes it's not about the person. It's about us wanting to control the situation. And we want to be the person that keeps them from whatever that looks like. And we can be a deterrent to that. But I encourage folks not to get into the idea that if the person dies by suicide, then that automatically means that we as the survivors failed them in some way. Because like you said, there's a lot of guilt and shame, like we kind of been talking about. With that, the approach looks very different from a person dies from old age or whatever versus a person dies by suicide. There's, folks don't want to talk about it. They don't want to say that's what happened. But again, if we don't talk, then people will feel like we can't say and we can't talk. And silence keeps us in darkness, ultimately.
Yeah. And going back, we talked a lot about, signs to look for and stuff like that. But I think it's one thing, and I can just remember that we missed. And I remember this from working on the crisis line. One thing we cannot do going into the situation is, I think, kind of piggybacking on what you say, is we can't think that we're trying to solve the problem or fix it, but we also can't go in there with, I think you have to be very delicate in your approach. You cannot go in there with a pray it away kind of approach, things to get better. It's not that bad. These are some things that I have found that will really trigger some people. It will really activate them and actually tune them out to what you're trying to say, because you think you're being helpful because maybe that's the way you would handle it. Because we're thinking, okay, everyone has dark thoughts. Well, me, myself, I've been depressed, but I've never thought of leaving this world, So telling someone you'll get over it, it can't be that bad, without actually knowing what you're talking about, I always say leave that to the professionals. And sometimes the best thing you can do is listen.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's not only what a person says, but sometimes it's what a person does not say.
Absolutely.
I always say that silence is it says a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So if they came to you, they don't necessarily want you to solve the problem or fix it. They know what your abilities are.
Right.
But they might want that comfort and that listening ear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I encourage folks not to go in accusatory, you're not thinking about killing yourself, are you? If I'm a person on the brink, that's not going to help me. I'm going to be okay, I'm going to say, I guess I'm not. Because if I say yes, what does that look like? Right? Based on how you came to me. Right. And so even if we are, if you're struggling internally with approaching someone who you are worried about in that way, we want to appear confident. We want to be calm. We want to be non-accusatory. We want to try to understand how the person feels from their point of view. Right. So we're there to listen, encourage the person to talk about how they're feeling, get the person to talk, even if it's uncomfortable for you. Right. We are wired to run from discomfort. But this is about saving a person's life.
Yeah.
So also being empathetic. Don't try to focus on, well, if I was you, I would, like you were talking about, Ms. Cara, be empathetic and focus your concern on how, their well-being. Focus on, I'm worried about you. I want you to be okay. I'm here for you. And don't make it about yourself, please.
Yeah. And it's okay to admit that you are not a problem solver, but hey, maybe we can go to the hospital or go to the center that I know and kind of see what help we can get you and see, what kind of programs there are because I won't want you to hurt anymore. So let's see what we can do to kind of, navigate around this and see if there's someone better prepared to help you.
It's okay if it's not you. It doesn't have to be us. In that moment, it's us. But if you're not capable of keeping the person safe or keeping yourself safe, like I said, 988, 911, use the resources that are there. There is he's a motivational speaker, and his name is Kevin Hines. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
But I have not.
So Kevin Hines is an individual who is one of, I think the number is a low number, 12, 13, maybe 16 people who survived a suicide attempt off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh.
So I'm on a nonprofit board, and he was the keynote speaker for their fundraiser gala a few years ago. And I saw a video of him maybe a decade ago. A video was circulating and kind of talking about his story. And so hearing him in person tell his story, he talked about that he was struggling, and he talks about his background and how he, grew up in foster care, and both his parents were in addiction, and it was just all the things you could think of were happening. And he was fed up. He was tired. And so he says he woke up that day and he was walking to the bridge. He had it in his mind, and he was crying the entire time. I mean, wailing, crying. And he was walking down the street. Nobody stopped him. Got on the bus, still crying. He says a person or two men were sitting next to him and they're talking to each other like, look at this guy. What's wrong with him? No one's saying anything. He gets off the bus. He's still crying. He gets to the bridge. No one stops him. And he says, if somebody would have just stopped, I wouldn't have done it. He also talks about that when he got to the bridge, as soon as he let his hands go, he instantly regretted it. Instantly was like, I don't want to do this. Right. And so he talks a lot about, so now, he survived. I mean, he had a lot of injuries, but he survived. And now he talks and he wrote, I'm pretty sure he wrote at least a couple books. And he talks about that sort of that permanent solution for temporary pain, right? That it's not that people want to die necessarily. It's, I want the pain to go away. So how do we sit in community? How do we sit in the space with folks who are in pain, but not minimize it, not dismiss it, but also shine a light on it? Because if we don't do that, they're doing that in the darkness, and that's what consumes folks. So we want to shine a light. We want to be present. We also want to, again, take ourselves out of it as best as we can and just be present for the person, and then also have the resources to back it up.
Thank you so much for that. If you could speak directly to someone listening who feels hopeless or alone right now, who may be having thoughts, or who may have attempted before, what message would you want them to hear?
I would want them to hear that it's not hopeless. It can get better. It can be different. You can be different. Your feelings, can be different tomorrow, but today, stay with us. We want you here, and I want you to want to be here too. And so I would encourage folks to really think about, I'm in pain. I feel like everything is going to be better without me, and life is better with you here.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
As we close, we want to leave you with this thought. You are living proof that your ancestors' dreams were valid, powerful, and worthy. How will you honor them today? Remember, as we walk this journey together, we are planting seeds for those who come after us. Let's root ourselves in hope, healing, and a vision for a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for joining us on Rooted in Our Ancestors' Dreams. If you want to keep in touch or get in touch with Rachael, Rachael, can you share some of your contact information and how our listeners can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So my website is b-thelight.info. That's b-thelight.info. On Instagram, at bethelight.info. That sounds right. Yeah. bethelight.info on Instagram, bethelight on Facebook, Rachael DuBose on LinkedIn. And so, yeah, absolutely. I love to get information. I love for people to reach out. Again, like I said, I'm certified to facilitate a lot of different modalities when it comes to training. And as we've been talking about what that looks like, what's next after we ask the question, what are the resources? And so, yeah, please reach out. Please tap in. I'm always available. Well, not always, but most of the time. Let me say boundaries.
Well, thank you so much. I would personally like to dedicate this to all of my clients who have been through this and who are going through this. And I hope that this one resonates with you. And also I want to, personally, I wish I had been an older version of myself back then, but I know I was a child, but I would like to kind of dedicate this to my uncle, Roosevelt Pop Johnson. And I wish he had known back then during that time, that there were people out there to help him and that it could have been a better situation. So I thank you so much for sharing those resources. I think it would help a lot of people, because people do not know about these myths and, this hope that there is that you can overcome these thoughts, these behaviors, these crises. That there are people out there that want to help.
Absolutely.
So until next time, stay rooted, stay inspired, and keep dreaming. Thank you.